3 nights in a row, same port city, hit again and again, while oil prices just jumped more than 9% in a single day, and a naval blockade gets switched back on like a light switch. This is not a one-time strike you'll forget about by next week. This is the third consecutive night the United States has hit the Iranian city of Bandar Abbas, and if you want to understand exactly why this specific city keeps ending up in the crosshairs, and why what's happening there right now might be the clearest signal yet of how this entire war is about to unfold, stay with me for the next 30 minutes, because this story is moving fast, and I'm going to walk you through every single piece of it. Let's start with exactly what happened, because the timeline here matters enormously. According to CNN, the United States launched its third straight night of strikes across a broad stretch of Iranian territory, with Iranian state media reporting explosions specifically in the port city of Bandar Abbas, along with the islands of Kish, Keshem, and Abu Musa. U.S. Central Command confirmed the operation, and President Trump formally notified Congress that what the White House described as limited military action had resumed inside Iran. Local reporting on the ground described hours-long strikes, not a single quick pass, but sustained operations continuing through the night. Iranian state broadcaster IRIB reported 3 separate explosions in Bandar Abbas alone in the early morning hours, though the agency didn't immediately provide further detail on exactly what had been hit or what damage resulted. Bandar Abbas isn't some random target the U.S. military happened to pick out of a list. This city sits directly on the coastline facing the Strait of Hormuz, arguably the single most strategically important stretch of water anywhere in the world for global oil shipping. If you're trying to disrupt Iran's ability to threaten or control traffic through that strait, Bandar Abbas is exactly where you'd expect repeated military attention to concentrate, and that's exactly what's been happening. This is not the first time this specific city has been hit during this latest escalation. Just 2 days earlier, according to CNN's reporting from July 11th, explosions were already being reported in Bandar Abbas and the nearby town of Sarik, both of which sit directly facing the strait. And go back even further, to July 7th, and you find the exact same pattern. CNN reported at that time that the United States had hit more than 80 targets across Iran, with multiple videos geolocated by CNN's own team showing explosions and large fires specifically in the port city of Bandar Abbas. So this isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern that's been repeating for over a week now, with Bandar Abbas showing up again and again as one of the primary locations getting hit. And the reason for that repetition becomes obvious once you understand what this entire round of strikes is actually about. This isn't a broad campaign aimed at toppling the Iranian government or destroying its military infrastructure everywhere at once. This is a far more targeted, more specific fight, one centered almost entirely around a single question. Who controls the Strait of Hormuz, and can commercial ships actually move through it safely? Let's rewind to what triggered this specific round of escalation, because the sequence of events here reads almost like dominoes falling one after another. According to CNN, this current round of strikes began after Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps forces attacked a Cyprus-flagged container ship that was transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC claimed the vessel had been crossing the strait using what it called an unauthorized route, essentially asserting the right to police which ships can pass through and which can't. The United States responded to that attack with strikes against Iran, and Iran in turn responded to those strikes by launching attacks against multiple American allies across the region. The IRGC said it launched what it called retaliatory strikes against Prince Hassan Air Base in Jordan. The United Arab Emirates said it was responding to missile and drone threats of its own. Bahrain activated air raid sirens and told residents to seek immediate shelter. Qatar's Ministry of Defense said it had intercepted a missile attack targeting the country directly. In other words, one attack on one container ship set off a chain reaction that within days had drawn in strikes or threats across half a dozen different countries. And then it escalated even further. According to CNN's most recent reporting, Iran claimed it had struck and disabled 2 vessels it described as rogue supertankers. The United Arab Emirates confirmed that Iranian missiles had hit 2 of its own tankers, specifically in Omani territorial waters inside the Strait of Hormuz, killing 1 crew member in the process. Think about that detail for a moment. These aren't military vessels caught in a war zone by circumstance. These are commercial oil tankers, hit while sitting inside the territorial waters of a third country, Oman, that isn't even a direct party to this conflict, resulting in the death of someone whose job was simply to help move oil through one of the busiest shipping corridors in the entire world. In response to that attack on the tankers, U.S. Central Command announced it would resume its naval blockade of ships traveling to and from Iranian ports, set to take effect at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And the financial markets reacted almost instantly. Global oil prices surged more than 9% on that single piece of news. Take a moment to appreciate how significant a 9% single-day jump actually is for a commodity as massive and as closely watched as global crude oil. That's not a minor market fluctuation. That's the kind of price movement that shows up directly in what ordinary people pay at gas pumps in countries thousands of miles away from Bandar Abbas, all triggered by a fresh military escalation over control of this one narrow waterway. Let's get into some of the specific details of what's actually been hit during these strikes, because the scope here is broader than just Bandar Abbas itself, even though that city keeps appearing at the center of it. According to CBS News, at least 30 fishing boats were destroyed when 2 American projectiles struck the Panjpella fishing pier in Bandar Abbas during this round of attacks on Iran's coastline. 30 fishing boats. Not warships, not military vessels, but the small fishing boats that represent the livelihood of ordinary coastal families who depend on the sea for their income. According to the Washington Times, additional strikes hit Iran's Farour Island, located southwest of Bandar Abbas, and that report specifically noted that 1 telecommunications worker was killed and 2 others were injured in that particular strike. At least 10 projectiles reportedly struck Keshem Island as well, located directly in the Strait of Hormuz, though the island's governor stated that all the targets hit there were military installations and that no casualties resulted from that specific attack. CNN's most recent update expands the list of targets even further, reporting that U.S. forces struck locations including Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas, essentially a sweep along a huge stretch of Iran's entire southern coastline facing the strait. And there's a piece of raw, ground-level footage that adds real human texture to all of this. CNN geolocated a video showing a burning glow from a fire, recorded by someone driving past the scene, who can be heard in the recording saying that a gas station had been hit in what's known as the Mohammadi area. CNN traced that specific footage to Saravan County, in Iran's Sistan and Baluchistan province, right near the border with Pakistan, showing just how widely this current wave of strikes has actually spread across Iranian territory, well beyond the coastal cities getting most of the international headlines. Now, this conflict isn't staying contained inside Iran's own borders either, and this is where the regional stakes really start to become clear. According to CNN, Iran has launched multiple waves of strikes toward Bahrain in recent hours. Smoke was visible over Manama, Bahrain's capital, after a drone was intercepted during the early morning hours. Bahraini officials issued a public statement urging citizens and residents to remain calm and head to the nearest safe location. A level of civil defense messaging you'd expect during an actual active military threat, not a distant, abstract conflict happening somewhere else. Multiple sirens have now sounded across the country, forcing ordinary people going about their daily lives to repeatedly stop whatever they're doing and seek shelter because of a war they aren't even directly participating in. Let's step back for a second and talk about the diplomatic side of this story, because even in the middle of this intense new round of strikes, there are still active efforts underway to try to pull the situation back from the brink. According to CNN, mediators had been actively pushing for renewed diplomacy between the United States and Iran after the 2 sides traded strikes earlier in the week, and President Trump had already declared the previous ceasefire officially over. Specifically, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met with his Omani counterpart on a recent Saturday, with discussions focused sharply on the Strait of Hormuz specifically. According to a source who spoke with CNN, Oman has actually drafted a tentative proposal aimed at managing traffic through the strait in a way that might de-escalate the immediate crisis. That detail matters because it tells you that even as missiles and drones continue flying and cities like Bandar Abbas keep absorbing repeated strikes, there's still a genuine diplomatic track running in parallel, with Oman positioning itself as a trusted go-between capable of talking to both Washington and Tehran at the same time. The United Nations has also weighed in directly on how dangerous this specific moment has become. According to the Washington Times, the UN issued a warning that these escalating attacks could lead to what it described as catastrophic hostilities if the situation isn't brought back under control soon. That's about as blunt a warning as an international body typically issues, and it reflects just how seriously the broader international community is taking the risk that this specific standoff over the Strait of Hormuz could spiral into something significantly larger and harder to contain than the strikes we've already seen so far. There's also a completely separate thread woven into this same broader crisis, one that doesn't get nearly as much attention as the Hormuz standoff itself, but is quietly complicating everything. According to CBS News, Israel's ongoing fight with Hezbollah in Lebanon, despite its own separate U.S.-brokered ceasefire, remains a major point of friction in the broader effort to build a lasting peace agreement between the United States and Iran. The Memorandum of Understanding signed back in mid-June between President Trump and his Iranian counterpart specifically calls for an immediate end to hostilities on every front, including in Lebanon, and Tehran has consistently argued that Israel keeping its forces stationed inside Lebanese territory constitutes a direct violation of that broader agreement. Israel and Hezbollah have continued exchanging attacks, even if at a somewhat reduced intensity compared to earlier in the war, with each side justifying its actions as a direct response to violations by the other. So even while the world's attention is understandably locked onto explosions in Bandar Abbas and tankers burning in the Strait of Hormuz, this entire broader peace framework is being pulled apart simultaneously from multiple different directions. Lebanon on one front, the Strait on another, each complicating any real progress on the other. Let's talk about President Trump's own public positioning throughout all of this, because it's been notably assertive and confident, even as the situation on the ground has continued escalating night after night. According to the Washington Times, Trump has claimed that U.S. military strikes have successfully reopened the strait for navigation, directly contradicting Iran's own repeated claims that it maintains control over the waterway. That's the exact same fundamental disagreement we saw play out earlier in this crisis, both governments making completely opposite claims about the basic operational status of one of the most important shipping lanes on the planet, with no independently verified consensus available to settle which version of events is actually accurate. So let's zoom out and ask the question that really matters here. Why does Bandar Abbas keep getting hit, night after night, strike after strike, more than any other single location in this entire conflict? The answer comes down to simple geography and strategy. Bandar Abbas isn't just a random coastal city. It functions as one of Iran's most critical military and logistical hubs, directly overlooking the Strait of Hormuz. If American military planners are trying to systematically degrade Iran's ability to threaten commercial shipping and control that waterway, a city sitting directly on the doorstep of the strait itself, housing military installations, coastal defense systems, and naval capability, is inevitably going to become one of the most heavily targeted locations in the entire operation, over and over again, as long as the underlying dispute over the strait itself remains unresolved. And that's really the core tension driving this entire story right now. This isn't a war being fought over broad ideological or territorial goals in the way earlier phases of this conflict were, back when strikes targeted Iranian leadership and nationwide military infrastructure. This latest phase is much more narrowly focused, centered almost entirely on a single strategic question: who gets to control passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and what happens to commercial shipping and the global economy while that question remains unsettled? And because that question hasn't been resolved, Bandar Abbas, sitting right at the geographic heart of that dispute, keeps absorbing strike after strike, night after night, while the rest of the world watches oil prices swing wildly and diplomats in Oman try to find some kind of workable framework everyone can actually agree to. Let's bring this back to the human level one more time before we close out, because it's easy to get lost in strategic analysis and forget that every single one of these strikes, every explosion in Bandar Abbas, every destroyed fishing boat, every telecommunications worker killed on Farour Island, represents real consequences for real people living through this conflict in real time. 30 fishing boats destroyed means 30 families who've likely lost their primary source of income overnight. A telecommunications worker killed means a family somewhere in Iran that woke up this week to devastating news that had nothing to do with any military decision they were ever part of. Sirens sounding repeatedly in Bahrain mean ordinary residents interrupted again and again in the middle of completely unrelated daily routines, forced to seek shelter because of a war being fought largely over a stretch of water many of them may never even see with their own eyes. So here's where this actually leaves us right now, as you're watching this video. The United States has struck Bandar Abbas and the broader Iranian coastline for a third consecutive night, part of a rapidly escalating standoff that began with a single attack on a container ship and has since drawn in strikes or threats against Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. Oil prices have surged more than 9% in response to the renewed American naval blockade. Diplomatic efforts are still quietly continuing in parallel, with Oman working to broker some kind of framework for managing traffic through the strait, even as the strikes themselves continue. And the United Nations has issued a direct warning that this entire situation could spiral into something far more catastrophic if a genuine resolution isn't found soon. What happens over the next few days is genuinely difficult to predict with any real confidence, given how quickly this exact situation has already shifted multiple times within just the past 2 weeks alone. Will Oman's proposed framework for the strait actually gain traction and pull both sides back from further escalation? Or does Bandar Abbas keep absorbing strikes night after night, while this standoff continues dragging in more countries and more casualties along the way? What we do know, based on everything that's happened just in the past week alone, is that this is a story moving fast, with real, immediate consequences for people living along Iran's coastline, for sailors and cargo ships trying to navigate one of the world's most important waterways, and for anyone anywhere who fills up a car with gasoline and watches the price at the pump respond to exactly this kind of headline. I want to know what you think happens next. Do you think Oman's diplomatic proposal actually manages to de-escalate this standoff before it spirals further? Or do you think we're heading toward exactly the kind of catastrophic outcome the United Nations has already warned about? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I read every single one of them, and this is exactly the kind of conversation I want happening on this channel. And if this video helped you actually understand why Bandar Abbas keeps showing up at the center of this story night after night, share it with someone who's been trying to keep up with this fast-moving conflict. Hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I will see you in the next video as we keep tracking exactly how this standoff over the Strait of Hormuz continues to unfold.